The world had always been noisy, filled with voices eager to tear him down, laughter that mocked his struggles, and whispers that doubted his worth. For years, Ion had endured it all. He had been the quiet one in the corner, the one they overlooked, the one they belittled. He wasn't weak. Oh, no. He simply chose silence over confrontation, patience over anger. But what they never realized was that his silence was not submission. It was observation. Ion had spent years listening to the sneers of those who thought him insignificant, to the fake praise that dripped from lips that had once insulted him, to the way they laughed at his dreams as if they were nothing more than fragile paper boats set to sink at the first wave. But they didn't see what was building inside him, an inferno of resilience, a determination that burned brighter with every insult. They took his silence as weakness. They mistook his patience for cowardice. And that, perhaps, was their greatest mistake. The mockery they thought was harmless. Ion had been working at the same company for 3 years, just another employee buried under an ocean of tasks. His ideas were ignored, his hard work went unnoticed, and his contributions were stolen by those who spoke louder, who carried the arrogance of entitlement. He saw his colleagues rise while he remained stagnant, overlooked like an old book collecting dust on a forgotten shelf. His manager, Rowan, was the worst of them all, a man who thrived on dominance, who believed authority was measured by how loudly one could belittle others. He often humiliated Ion in front of the team, dismissing his suggestions with a condescending smile. "Maybe you should just stick to the basics, Ion," Rowan had said one day, laughing along with the rest of the team. "Big ideas aren't for everyone." The room had erupted into laughter. Ion had simply smiled, nodded, and returned to his work. But inside, something had shifted. The walls of patience were beginning to crack. The breaking point. There comes a moment in every story when the underestimated decide they've had enough. For Ion, it wasn't dramatic outburst or a fiery confrontation. No, his revenge was far more terrifying. It was silence. He stopped trying to prove himself, stopped explaining, stopped waiting for recognition. Instead, he worked in the shadows, building something of his own, while they celebrated their shallow victories. He poured every ounce of his energy into a project he had been nurturing in secret, one that had the potential to shake the very foundations of the company. For months, he stayed late at the office, long after the laughter and mockery had faded into the night. He studied, researched, and built something no one expected from a man they had dismissed as insignificant. Then came the day of the annual company meeting, the day everything changed, the silence that shook them. The conference hall was packed. The executives sat in the front row, expectant, eager to hear the usual parade of reports and presentations. Rowan stood on stage, confident as ever, ready to present the project he had claimed as his own, an idea that, unknown to everyone, had been Ion's. But then, something unexpected happened. Just as Rowan was about to speak, the CEO interrupted. "Before we begin, there's someone I'd like to acknowledge," he said. "Over the past few months, we've seen groundbreaking development behind the scenes, work that has the potential to change the entire industry. And the mastermind behind it is none other than Ion." A stunned silence fell over the room. Rowan's smirk faltered. The team that had mocked him shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They turned to look at Ion, who sat at the far end of the room, calm, composed, unbothered. Slowly, he stood up. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't rub their faces in their failure. He simply walked to the stage, shook the CEO's hand, and delivered his presentation, effortlessly, flawlessly. And then he did something that sent a shiver down their spines. He turned to face them all, met their gazes one by one, and smiled. A smile that carried no malice, no anger, only the weight of silent victory. And in that moment, they realized something terrifying. They had laughed at his struggles. They had mocked his silence. Now they feared it. The room was still. The air, once filled with arrogance and superiority, now carried the weight of regret and fear. Ion's silence spoke louder than any words ever could. He didn't need to remind them of their past mockery. His presence, his success, did it for him. The CEO, impressed beyond words, had made his decision right then and there. "Ion, we want you to lead this project." You've proven yourself to be more than capable. From this moment forward, you'll be heading the new department. Gasps filled the room. Rohan, the man who had spent years belittling Ion, sat frozen in his seat. His grip on the armrest tightened as the reality of the moment crashed over him. He had stolen Ion's ideas, ridiculed his abilities, and dismissed him as nothing more than a background character. And yet, here they were, Ion standing at the front, commanding the room, while he sat powerless in the crowd. Ion didn't look at him. He didn't need to. The shift in power. Over the next few weeks, the office dynamic changed. The people who once ignored Ion now hung onto his every word. The same colleagues who had laughed at him now sought his guidance, hoping to align themselves with his success. But Ion remained the same. He didn't let their sudden admiration sway him. He had seen their true colors. He knew they respected him now only because they feared what his silence had done to them. Rohan, on the other hand, was crumbling. His power had been built on arrogance and volume. But now, his voice carried no weight. People whispered about how the tables had turned. The respect he once commanded had been transferred to Ion, and the realization crushed him. One evening, Rohan approached Ion's office, knocking hesitantly. "Ion, can we talk?" he asked, his voice stripped of its former confidence. Ion looked up from his desk, gesturing for him to enter. Rohan hesitated before speaking. I want to say I was wrong about you." Silence. Ion simply watched him, unblinking. Rohan shifted uncomfortably. "I treated you unfairly. I should have seen your potential instead of stepping on me." Ion finished for him, his voice calm but sharp. Rohan swallowed hard. "Yes." Ion leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Then, after a moment, he stood and walked to the window, staring at the city skyline. "Do you know what the most dangerous thing in the world is, Rohan?" he asked. Rohan shook his head. "It's not anger. It's not revenge. It's silence." Ion turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Because when someone stops explaining, stops seeking validation, stops proving their worth, that's when you should be afraid. It means they've already won. Rohan lowered his gaze, ashamed. Ion didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He had spoken enough. His silence would do the rest. The lesson they'll never forget. Over time, Ion's reputation only grew. He became a leader, an innovator, someone people respected, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. His success wasn't fueled by vengeance, but by a simple truth. You don't need to fight to prove yourself. You don't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful response is no response at all. And that silence, that unshaken, unwavering silence, was what they feared the most.